The Out of Bounds Show is driven by your next Ford F-150 truck at Mack Haik Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Pre-owned or new. Mack Haik Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We welcome in NFL insider and worked at ESPN on the NFL team for years. And we've had Russell Baxter on many a times, but Russell Baxter joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line to talk about his friend and colleague, Chris Mortenson, the absolute legend who I grew up watching. And he's known as Mort, as all of us know, one of the best NFL reporters ever in the history of the NFL. Russell Baxter, good morning, and my condolences to you.
Well, thank you very much. I was home, and a name you'll know, Howie Schwab, who was Stump the Schwab at ESPN, and I got a voicemail from him, and then suddenly I got a text, and then I understood what happened, and I can only tell you spending time with Chris Mortenson was such an amazing experience because of the human being that he was. Forget for a second how good he was at his job. He put everybody at ease. He made us laugh like nobody ever. I referred to him as the world's funniest human. And now he's heaven's funniest angel.
When was the first time or first year that you met him, Russell?
Well, I was a freelancer when I first started up there, Bo, in 1989. And I was helping out the NFL shows from afar when I was working in New York. In 1990, I started making visits on the weekend to work on, I'm trying to think of it was called, I think it was NFL Game Day at the time, and eventually became Sunday NFL Countdown. And more importantly, I was around for NFL Prime Time and, eventually in the studio for a long time. Now, Mort did not do prime time, but he did the morning show. So Mort's first year was 1991. It was my third year, in essence, with the company. And, he came from a very solid writing background. He had written a book. And I used to, it's funny, and you'll remember this publication. Talk about small world. I worked at a paper called College and Pro Football News Weekly in Long Island with Howie Schwab and some other guys like Craig Ellenport and Peter Hayes. Who all gone on and done a lot of different things and so on. But one of the things we did in Long Island, Bo, is we printed a copy of a sports paper called The National. Do you remember The National?
Yes.
Okay, well, Chris Mortenson was a writer for The National, as were a lot of big names. So I got to see that paper all the time because we actually printed it in our building in Port Washington, Long Island. So eventually I got to know Mort and working with him. And like I said, outstanding at what he does, thorough. And the thing about Mort, too, was his willingness to be unselfish, his willingness to want to help people in the industry. I think a great example. In fact, I was in touch with him last night, as a matter of fact, and I know he spoke on the air yesterday. Mort brought up a young man to the draft one year named Daniel Jeremiah. And he helped out Mort during the draft, I think, for a couple of years, and now you know what he does.
Sure.
He's like, he went on to become a scout. He's now, him and Lance Zierlein are the stars of the NFL draft, as far as I'm concerned, with the NFL Network now, either on NFL.com or NFL Network. And I know I was in touch with Daniel. He's one of the first persons I thought of when I got the news and so on. Another great guy, and he refers to Mort as his mentor. And I heard from a lot of people last night, Bo, and talked to a lot of people and a lot of memories. And for those of us who were in that building at the time, and I've been gone for a long time now, but I hear from Mort. I would see Mort in Canton. In fact, I was telling my wife 2 days ago, Mort retweeted one of my countdown things. I do, as you know, I count down the jersey numbers today. And Mort, I got a retweet from Mort, and then I got the news yesterday, and very heavy heart and so on, because he just made you laugh, and family was so important to him. You know, he got to know my wife and, you know, my daughter and, you know, who was an infant at the time. And he just always stressed how important his family was. His wife, Mickey, is sensational. His son, Alex, has done things in football and all over the place and so on. And, you know, he got the Dick McCann Award from the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2016. I was there for that, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
And that's the prestigious writing award. You know, I've been, you know, not to make it about me, and it's not about me. I've been so blessed with the people I've worked. Dick McCann.
Yeah, you have.
Award. You know, Tom Jackson and Chris Berman have both got the Pete Rozelle Award from the Pro Football Hall of Fame for television and broadcasting, and so many other people and so on. But Mort set a standard. And I can tell you, before we got into the cell phone era, Bo, you know, Mort at ESPN was getting paged more than a bellboy at a hotel.
That's what I was going to ask you, Russell Baxter, who longtime ESPN employee on the NFL team, worked with Mort, Chris Berman, Tom Jackson, among many other talented people, both in front of the camera and behind, as Russell will tell you. During a magical time, I was in high school and college in the 90s, and I lived for all of this that Russell Baxter is talking about, Sports Center and Sunday NFL Countdown and all the shows. Talk about his schedule and how, because we see Adam Schefter now, and we all have phones, and Schefter's got multiple phones, and now we can all text and do all this stuff. It's a different deal in 91, 93, 95 for Mort as far as how he is accumulating information and talking to people. Walk us through that, Russell.
Well, it was working the phones and getting calls from general managers when he had put in calls, and doing the NFL draft, which is really, you know, he was so vital when it came to doing the NFL draft. And of course, he was the guy with the Colts when Mel talked about Trent Dilfer and criticizing the Colts, and he was the person who was in Indianapolis with Bill Tobin, who was the general manager, who, of course, you know, went on that rant about who the hell was Mel Kiper and all that. So, you know, that it was more beating down the doors back then. There was no, you know, there's no internet per se. I mean, the internet was around, but it was not what it was now. But that's not how he gathered his information. Mort talked to everybody, and he was thorough, and he double checked his sources and so on. And he brought, not that ESPN didn't have any credibility, he brought so much credibility when it came to the NFL stories. I remember one of the funniest things I always remember was when he first started there. And if we had a preseason game, Bo, we would go to Mort, say at halftime, okay? And Mort went on this spiel of information. It was all such great stuff. And I could see just Chris Berman looking at him, and was just in amazement and in awe because of what he was able to ascertain in the summer before the season started. And again, spending time with him away from the show and, you know, what we used to call the war room in terms of watching the games on Sunday. Mort was always there with us and so on, even though he didn't do NFL primetime, but he was, again, making his calls. And then, of course, the cell phone generation, and things got a little easier. And, of course, Adam Schefter joined and so on. And they become such a dynamite team working off of each other and so on. But like I said, the humor, and that it's very important because television can be very stressful, as you know. Okay? Same thing with the radio business. When they tell you 15 seconds, that doesn't mean 16 seconds, right?
Right.
Right. When they tell you you've got 1 minute and you go 1 minute 5, oops, it doesn't work that way. You got to hit your marks and so on. And like I said, this was almost like a natural when it came to TV. He never took himself so seriously, but he took his work very, 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 very seriously and so on. And journalism and integrity was very, very important to him.
Wow. When you were in the thick of it with all of you, I mean, all of y'all on the NFL team for ESPN, and I want to stay in the 90s.
Okay.
Did you was it hard to comprehend because you were so close to it, or did you realize, Russell, the magic that y'all were making and that was happening regardless of show, whichever one? You've referenced several of them. Did you realize the magic that y'all were creating?
Are you going to bring me to tears? I look back at it now, Bo, and, talking with, other people who are not there anymore anyway, and realizing what exactly it was. And probably, and I don't want to single one show out, but it's hard not to, and that's prime time.
Sure.
Because of the impact it had on players, that players were watching it in the locker room, that teams were watching it after the game. And I was able to, the first couple of years I wasn't in the studio. I was on the air because we didn't have it set up that way. And then eventually I was there, and I never missed a show. I was I want to say, was it 17 years? And I was there 22 years and never called out sick. Who in their right mind would call out sick if you had to watch football? Although, I was there almost every day during football season and so on. And I realize it now. I don't know if the words magic is where I thought of. I can tell you that doing prime time, and I know we're getting a little away from Mort, but Mort was there and Mort contributed.
Oh, it all ties together.
When he was not, even though he was not on the show, he was there giving us stuff that we wouldn't have gotten from any other person. And to sit there, especially the late game highlights, where Chris and Tommy didn't get to see as much of the game, especially if it was wrapping up, because we were already on the air doing the early games. That's really where the magic came from, the natural rapport between Chris Berman and Tom Jackson, and Chris and his nicknames, and Tom is in his insight. And again, Tom was a natural as well. And Chris is one of the best writers I've ever worked with.
Wow.
His historic acronym is unquestionable. He's a history major, and he transferred a lot of that into the National Football League. But now I look back at it, and I look anytime there's a note on social media. And a lot of the guys I work with aren't big on social media, like Chris and Tommy and so on.
Right.
But boy, do people miss the original NFL primetime. Anytime I'm able to put a YouTube highlight up on some of my pages and so on. And I remember sitting in the studios of the thing and rushing over there with those cards and giving them my numbers and answering any question they needed me to answer, and always double checking that as well. And now I look back at it now, and I know Chris does primetime on that ESPN Plus with Booker McFarland and so on. But those years in the studio, that studio is now named after Chris and Tommy.
Wow.
Yeah. I believe it's still the highest rated show on the network.
That doesn't surprise me. Even over game day on Saturday morning, that doesn't surprise me, Russell.
And here was the other thing. Let me throw out something. I got a chance to work with Robin Roberts on NFL Primetime, because that's where she was before she eventually went to Good Morning America. And the thing that always struck me about Robin was she would come back from doing a hit on SportsCenter. She'd come right back to a video monitor to check her work. And I guess Bill Pito did NFL Primetime. Of course, Stuart Scott did NFL Primetime for a little bit. Pete Axthelm was part of it. The late great NFL writer Pete Axthelm. So it was such a great experience, and then Mort just came and added a new layer to the fun we were already having. And like I said, spending time with those guys and sitting in that room and watching that game, and one day I'll have it all written down, though. And if you ever see a book that comes out with my name on it, and it's called The Best Seat in the House, you'll know exactly what it's about.
Oh, wow. The stories. Russell Baxter.
But I'm not done yet. I'm not, I'm fortunate. I'm still doing a lot of writing and able to talk to you and other people and so on. And Yeah, a lot of stories and a lot of laughing. And like I said, besides the regulars at ESPN, the fact that we got to work with, Marty Schottenheimer,
Yeah.
Bill Parcells, Sterling Sharp was with us for 8 years, and he was dynamite.
I thought he was fantastic, Russell.
Well, you want to talk about a natural? My
Ugh.
goodness, I mean, he was phenomenal, and he was with us for 8 years and so on. He stepped right in, it is a magical time, and when you hear from people this last 24 hours who shared those magical times, it brings a little tear to your eye, and it brings a big smile. And I said to somebody last night, I've laughed a lot and I've cried a lot since the news broke and so on. But like I said, he's up there, and I'm sure he is causing mischief already.
I love it. Russell Baxter, 22 years at ESPN, worked on the NFL team. He mentioned the shows, Sunday Night Primetime and Sunday NFL Countdown. We're talking Chris Mortenson, among others. And Mort passed away over the weekend, legendary reporter and NFL insider. And as Russell framed up, and this is what blows me away, I didn't realize it as a college kid as I'm watching these shows religiously, is how to get the information. I mean, it's landlines. And now, we all, like I'm texting with Russell Baxter this morning, in between breaks, segments. And so it's just a different deal.
Yeah, that thing up here a second. I can remember in 1991, I used to have to call the press boxes, okay, to get final stats for the late games, because there was no internet site that you could go on there and get individual stats. And I'm scribbling down. I can remember. I'll tell you a story when it comes to the inside humor that went on those shows. 1991, the final week of the season, I am running back and forth in and out of the studio on the phone with the National Football League as they are explaining the playoff scenarios to me.
Wow.
I cut a corner and I fall. Okay? I'm okay. I go back and I sit in my seat, and Chris Berman comes out of the break and goes, and now as we go crashing into week 17. Now, no one else knows what we're talking about. but that's the kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff. I heard from Chris last night. I heard from Tommy last night, and so on. There was, like I said, the fun. I would tell people, when we would sit up in that room for those 6 hours and watch those games, if it was a fun day in the room, it was going to be a fun show, and it was fun football. If the football was bad, it wasn't necessarily a great show, because that show was indicative of the room. Okay? And 99% of the time, it was fun. Okay? To me, there was never I've seen some bad football, but there's never a really bad day of football. I think everybody would agree with that. But the other, and I'll throw this out, and this has nothing so much to do with the talent, but it's just the way this show was set up in the original contract. But as you know, we could show 30 seconds of a game, and we could show 5 minutes of a game.
Okay.
Okay, so in other words, we weren't restricted in terms of
Great point.
Hours during prime time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the deal. I think the last season was 2005 under that deal. And then, of course, here comes the NFL Network, and, NBC is now in the fray with Sunday Night Football, and, the contract changed and all that. And the contracts are constantly changing. Look at the landscape of professional football on TV now. You've got CBS and Fox showing both conferences games. That was never the case when I was growing up. When I was growing up, NBC had the AFC and CBS had the NFC, and that was that. So and now we have flex scheduling and Thursday night football and all those different things, and we don't even know who the hell's playing the final week of the season.
Right.
Okay, so it's such and I think it's all for the best. And but like I said, during prime time, those years with primetime, especially, and I will also say this: doing Countdown, which was really, I mean, eventually the show expanded to 3 hours, but I was always amazed of what we were able to do, considering we were a pregame show without a game.
Yeah.
In other words, CBS did NFL Today or what, and so on, but they were leading into games.
Right.
So was Fox. We weren't leading into games. Our next football would be primetime, 6 hours later. But yet we were able to set you up for the day.
Wow. Russell Baxter, longtime ESPN employee on the NFL team, sharing, unbelievable stories of Chris Mortenson and Chris Berman and Tom Jackson, among many others. Sterling Sharp. Wow. And that was great. Well, Russell Baxter, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for taking some time, and thanks for sharing a couple of stories on your good friend, Chris Mortenson, Mort, Hall of Famer, just incredible talent. But as you started off the interview, just an unbelievable person, obviously, that kept y'all laughing and having fun.
He was the best. I mean, and he was best because of the kind of man he was, and he was the best because of what he wanted you to be. Not that he, other than importance of family was something that he stressed. Even if I was having a bad day or somebody was having a bad day, there'd be like a little subtle reminder, sitting here in this room is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. Russell Baxter, longtime NFL insider on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Russell, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Good to talk to you again, Bo.
Russell Baxter on the Out of Bounds show, 22 years at ESPN, working with an unbelievable team, both in front of the cameras and behind the cameras, including Chris Mortenson, Chris Berman, Tom Jackson, and many others. We're live in the BankPlus Studio, and the show is driven by your next Ford F-150 truck at Mack Haik Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Good morning. Welcome in. March Madness is brought to you by the Golden Moon Casino Sportsbook and Lounge, an award-winning Dancing Rabbit Golf Club. Bet $50. Play award-winning Dancing Rabbit Golf Club for $30. Book your stay and play right now. The Big Dance, March Madness, right around the corner. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Never thought that I would interview Kenny Mayne once, but twice in a month is a pretty big deal. We're talking about his friend, Chris Mortenson. We've been talking about Chris Mortenson Mort all morning. And again, I kind of went down this road with Kenny Mayne a few weeks ago. When I'm in college at Mississippi State, Sunday NFL Countdown and Sunday Night Primetime is much-watched TV for all of the guys. Starting on Sunday morning, you're putting your fantasy football team in by hand and by landline. And then you're watching Sunday NFL Countdown with Chris Berman and Tom Jackson. And Mort was the dude. He was the guy. So we welcome in Kenny Mayne, ESPN Sports Center legend, among other things. And my condolences, Kenny, on Mort.
Yeah, man, he was a good one. Like, everybody who wrote what they wrote yesterday, you kind of saw it on Twitter or whatnot, it was funny because so many people wrote almost the same thing, just said it in a different way. And for most of us, it had nothing to do with what he did on TV and what he did as a writer, which all those things were great. But I didn't even think of that part. I just thought of him, the guy that always cared about my kids, always cared about me. And I always felt bad. I was just telling a friend, like, he knew more about me than I knew about him, right? Because he always was so kind and compassionate and curious. Like, his curiosity helped him a great deal in the work he did, and then it also was like such a great attribute in the person he was. And he was just good. I missed the little text exchanges we kept having even after I left ESPN. There were the times I would bump into him at a game or wherever, and like I said, it was just one beautiful little tribute to him after another that I was reading all day yesterday and this morning, and most of them were quite similar. Just a kind, caring guy, a good guy.
Kenny Mayne on the Out of Bounds Show. Hard to wrap our brain around, Kenny. I mean, you live this, but that Chris Mortenson had a pager, and we just had Russell Baxter on, and he walked us through some stories, but that Mort had a pager and he'd have to go to a landline, whereas like you just described today, we're all communicating via text in seconds. That's a whole different ballgame in the 90s.
Yeah, honestly, sometimes I wonder how any of us did anything that we did. The immediacy of the information now, how quickly, I used to have to call Uncle Gordy to get things settled on disputes. Right now I just go to Google. But, Chris was doing this breaking news stuff, and this guy's been traded, and this and that's happening across the league. And like you said, he did it, the old-fashioned way. I mean, heck, when I first started, Chris was already there. But when I was like freelancing to get to ESPN, I too had a pager, and ESPN would page me, and I'd see the 800 number that I recognized, knowing, all right, I got another job. Call back to the assignment desk. Hey, we want you to go interview Sean Kemp about whatever, So it was definitely a different era, but he would have been good, and he still was good in any era, right? With different means. Like you look at Adam Schefter has like 9 cell phones and wears them on his hip. Here's this one, here's that one. But again, there's a million great stories about the things he did, the funny things he did, his great sense of humor. He was just good to be around. Like you walk in a room, and if he was in the room, it was a better room. You can't say that about everybody, right? Like he always kind of brought some warmth to it. And then again, a lot of people ask, how you doing, or what's up, or, they're just saying it out of form, that's what you're supposed to say, but he meant it. He was very sincere in his curiosity about how your life was going, what you're up to. And I think the tributes from the players, I just saw this clip. I'd forgotten this even happened. It was, why am I spacing on his name? The Arizona receiver. Come on.
Fitzgerald?
Yeah. Sorry. Lost my head. He had made some big play in a game, and in the post game, the first thing he wanted to talk about is sending out his best wishes to Chris. The news had just come that he was dealing with what he was dealing with. But it just kind of showed the affection, so many people had for him. And I think I said it in the way I try to do my little tribute is just what's a blessing for him being with us is how many of us think we had a unique relationship with that guy, right? How many people felt touched by him in a way that, like, oh man, we have a great tight relationship, but so many people could say that because of the way he treated everybody, right?
We're visiting with Kenny Mayne. Was with ESPN for years, Sports Center, among other things. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show and celebrating his friend and someone who we watched on TV and thought the world of, Chris Mortenson. But you listen to the stories from Kenny and others and just how good a guy he was, how good a dude he was just in everyday life. And he was known to Mort, all of us. And that was back when, again, Sunday morning, Sunday NFL Countdown in primetime was must-watch TV. You're still trying to figure out your fantasy football score because, hell, you didn't have a computer. You didn't have the internet, or not many people did in the mid-'90s when I was in college. What was it like, Kenny, to do Sports Center on Sunday nights after primetime?
Oh, it was a different era in the time period you're describing, where the information, like you said, wasn't readily available. So you really, really depended on him and really the whole show, right? If you weren't watching that show at that hour, you didn't get to see the pictures of whatever it is we're talking about, right? And so in that sense, the importance of it was magnified, right? Where now everybody thinks they're an expert. We all got our little methods of gaining the information. But yet, even in this more modern era, it's still something to say that his word was trusted. You still needed him to declare, right? Even if you thought you knew the info, he was going to be the confirmation of whatever you were trying to dispute. And in the old days, it was the first piece of information. Now it was more the confirming information. But nonetheless, I think most people who liked him back in the days we're describing stayed with him just because he was so damn likable. Like, I want to hear what he has to say, and I want to hear the way he says it. And, he just became kind of a, piece of Americana, right? Like, he was one of the real first ones being that breaking news guy within the leagues, who's getting traded, who's sitting in the game, or whatever the case, right? And I've seen a lot of the tributes come from a lot of those who followed him in that field, because it's a whole thing now, right? There's every outlet has a replica of him, right? A guy or a girl that is the insider, coming up with the stuff that you need to know for, following your team, or like you were saying, for your fantasy choices or whatever the case.
Yeah. It was fantasy football. I'm thinking 94, 95, 96. You were putting your team in on Sunday morning and you're writing it down. Then you were calling your fantasy football commissioner on a landline. And then you watched the games, and then primetime gave you some of what your scores and numbers were. I was thinking about this, Kenny, as I was reading all kinds of things on Mort throughout the weekend, is for John Walsh to put Peter Gammons from print to TV and Chris Mortenson from print to TV, and for it not just to be a home run but a grand slam. How powerful was that for the medium?
Yeah. Oh, it became, you had everybody in their different roles, right? You had the anchors who ran the show, and you had the field reporters who did the features, the interviews. But then came the kind of the advent of the inside information person, right? That it just became a new branch of what ESPN did, and then others obviously did the same later. But, you were talking about, I forget if we mentioned this the last time, we were talking about fantasy in the old days. Our fantasy league in Seattle, which a bunch of friends put together and still exists, that one, you were talking about landline, there was one guy who had a fax machine at his house. That was like the height of technology, right? The rest of us, we would have to go to, like a Kinko's or something, and if we wanted to send hot information, we had to pay the $1 to fax the page over to him. But yeah, it's all it's all changed and it all got fancier and modern, but he and others, he's not the only one who was very popular and very important in one era, and yet they still were in the new era.
Yeah. Well, Kenny, thank you so much for your time today, for doing this again, and for sharing some stories on Chris Mortenson and your relationship with him. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, if you got a second, I got one more fast one.
Absolutely.
That I was really impressed by a guy I know, Justin Tinsley, very good writer, and he's done all sorts of things. And I saw what he wrote, and then at the very bottom, he noted, I never even met him. I was never even in a room with him. And yet everything he was saying sounded like somebody he had an intimate, tight relationship with. But that really spoke to me, where how impactful he was to, effectively a stranger, right? Like just somebody who admired him and kind of got what he was from a distance, and how much it helped him and inspired him to do what he ended up doing. So I thought that was as good a tribute as any. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's what Russell Baxter mentioned. Like what y'all did, he talked about writing on the fly. And Chris Mortenson, Chris Berman, all you guys on Sports Center. And he just talked about how powerful and what a talent that is, because it's just boom, TV is fast. And even back then it's super fast. And you didn't have all the stuff you have today. And I thought he nailed it earlier this morning when he talked about, men and women who can just write on the fly. What a talent that is. Kenny Mayne on the Out of Bounds show. And Kenny, thanks so much again for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I be well.
ESPN Sports Center legend on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, Kenny Mayne, joining us on the Out of Bounds show, and brought to you by Boar's Head, Jason. Boar's Head Premium Meats, Boar's Head Premium Cheeses, and Boar's Head Hummus. 5th generation owned, American owned. Boar's Head for game day, pizzas, nachos, and charcuterie boards, all brought to you by Boar's Head. Compromise elsewhere.